Hey, Tommy, I think you can start.
Ka te ake. Waire runga, waire raro, waire rotu, waire waho, waire ngā wehi, waire ngā taumahatanga kai wenungi tēnā, tātou ko rau I ka mai nei, tūturu whakamaua kia tīna, haungie, huie, tai kie. E ngā mana I ngā reo, e ngā maunga, whakahi, e ngā Aotearoa I whenua, e ngā koiora, a tēnā maunga, a tēnā ngāhere, a tēnā repo, a tēnā awa, a tēnā moana neira, Te Tira Whakamātaki, he mihi kaua tuana kia koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora everybody, and welcome to our webinar, What Does Biosecurity Mean to Māori? As you can imagine, that is a big kaupapa and something that we cannot tackle in 1 hour, despite our prestiged guests that we have. So this, in fact, is a series of webinars. And over the next couple of months, we will be diving into this kaupapa along with many more. And it's in supported by Biosecurity New Zealand in preparation for a Māori Biosecurity Symposium that we'll be co-hosting in 2022. So keep an eye out for that. And as I said, we've got 3 guests tonight that we're going to sort of dive into this kaupapa with. But what I do ask is, and I mentioned it before, but if you've just joined us, please put your microphones on mute. If you do have any pārtai, feel free to send them to me. You can send them on the chat. We've got people monitoring the live Facebook stream, so you can send them on Facebook as well. And if you want to cut the queue and get in the VIP section, send me your secret hunting spots and your questions, and I'll get it to the front of the list. Hoi anō. With that, I will, bear with me, quickly pass now to our guests to introduce themselves. Before we dive into it. So what I will do, bear with me as I try and navigate this text space, is, where are you? Hopefully that recording is, I have lost Nick Waipara. I cannot find him in the sea of people that are here. Nick, are you there, please?
Got a tummy. I'm having IT issues too.
Oh.
That's probably why you can't see me, so I can hear you.
I've got you. All right. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into it?
Well, where can I? Kia ora, and mihi tami, kia ora koutou. I can't. I've just gone out.
All right, we're going to come now to you. Okay, bear with me, everyone. Mel, we'll come to you. So, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Apologies for the IT illiterate people in this room today. We will sort it out, I'm sure, by the time the wahine toa Amanda gets to speak and ensure that it's much smoother for the rest of the night. So he uri au o Ngāti Parau, rātou ko Ngāti Kahungunu ki Wairarapa, ko Te Arawa, Te Atiawa, Ngāti Raukawa hoki, ko Mao Mark Shabot tōku ingoa. Like all of you in this room, and I can see many of the names, I wear multiple hats. I am, along with Nick and Amanda, one of the co-founders of Te Tira Whakamātaki, and proudly so. Also kind of act in the CEO role at the moment. And when we get into what is TTW, you'll probably figure out some of the structures and what other roles we play. I also wear the DeepSec Māori Rights and Interests hat at the Ministry for the Environment for 4 days of the week. And I like to tell people I'm a recovering academic. When I was an academic, I was in the Bioprotection Research Centre, which is recently rebranded, and Amanda will talk about that, no doubt. And my background is in social science. So I usually tell people I'm an Indigenous ecological or an Indigenous environmental sociologist, sorry. That's just a flash way of saying that I'm really nosy and I like to know how things work and how communities work and what people think and what they do. And I have a background kind of in the biosecurity space, obviously, as we'll talk about, but in the wider kind of environmental management space, and predominantly with Simon Lambert, if he's online, when the disaster risk resilience space. So other than that, I guess I do lots of things. I've been involved in Māori committees, Māori council, yeah, a mum of 4 kids, all that kind of stuff, eh, Tommy?
And big mihi to you, Mel. Mel was rushing around organising her kids before this, so we're super lucky to get her 5 minutes before this. We were quite worried that she wasn't going to make it in time, but being a super mum that she is, she juggled everything and got here with 5 minutes to spare. Amanda, we'll go to you now.
Oh, kia ora tātou. Nā mihi nui kia koutou. He rea hau nā tūhoi me whakatōhea. Te iwi ko Amanda Black tōku ingoa. So my name is Amanda Black, originally from Whakatane. I'm now currently based at Lincoln University. I'm a professor here. I'm also the director of Bioprotection Aotearoa. So it's one of their centres of research excellence. And also co-founders Melanie spoke to of Te Tira Whakamātaki way back when, and I'm currently a Rutherford Discovery Fellow, and that allows me to do some real deep dives into the Kodi dieback research space and help integrate some mātauranga into that as well. My journey into science kind of came accidentally. I was one of those few people that really wanted to be a vet, but actually didn't quite get around to doing it. So I did a whole bunch of other things at Otago University when I moved down there, which from Whakatane seemed really exotic and kind of why I went. And I kind of, I guess, stumbled my way through my journey in science, eventually ending up at Lincoln University through ESR. 3 years later, I met Melanie Maishabot, who was actually in Bioprotection Research Centre at the time. I didn't know what that is, but like every other Māori researcher and scientist, you tend to coalesce together, and from there a nucleus of something happens, and from there we have this. That's me. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe, Amanda. And I see Nick has just joined us. So again, bear with me as I try to scroll through to find him. Nick, are you there, Eho? All right, I still can't hear Nick. Hoi anō. What I'll quickly do, as you can see, between Nick, Mel and Amanda, they have tons of experience in this space. In fact, when I first sort of got into this space, their names were synonymous with biosecurity. Every time I sort of Googled biosecurity in Māori, it was those three that kept popping up. And a lot of the biosecurity work at the time, when I got back from overseas, was featured them and the fights that they were getting into, the mahi that they were doing, protecting our taonga. And I think even now, if you do a quick Google search around Māori biosecurity, their names are quickly top on the list. And in fact, Nick, if he is there, he has become synonymous with Kodi dieback and mineral rust, and is considered a world-leading expert in that space. So very humbled that one, they were able to what is Te Tira Whakamātaki, and two, that they're able to share their time, because as you can imagine, they're in hot demand and everyone wants a piece of them. So as we talk about Te Tira Whakamātaki, I see a lot of people who have been part of that journey online, and a lot of people who know the work that Te Tira Whakamātaki has done. I myself know that have seen the benefits of Te Tira Whakamātaki, or TTW, wearing my iwi hat. So when it comes to iwi navigating the biosecurity system, TTW has been a real good ally. With that though, we'll quickly dive into the origins of it and how it all got started. So Mel, I might come to you first.
Kia ora, thanks for that, Tami, and hopefully Nick will get online soon. Otherwise, maybe Amanda and I will introduce him, and then what we say about Nick might not be true, but it might be entertaining. So I'm really excited to be here, and like you said, Tami, want to acknowledge all the TTW whānau that are online. So those who are really closely and intimately connected to TTW, like Matua Kevin, Whaia Aroha, and others I can see, and then those who have been part of our journey. So kia ora to you, and I see Graham on there and others as well. So and lots of our colleagues as well. So acknowledge all of our CRI colleagues, our B3 friends, our Scion friends, our industry friends that are on. Thank you all for joining. And I think Amanda will probably be good to jump in here as well. So if you pin her, then we might even just play tag team. TTW, and she'll probably get the right history. TTW comes from originally Amanda, Nick, and I just being overburdened. So I remember probably in about 2013 or 14, Nick, Amanda, and I were, as you say, Tami, probably some of the very few academics or Māori academics working in biosecurity. And I mean Māori academics, there were plenty of Māori working in biosecurity. And we were getting we were getting asked all the time to give a Māori view, Māori perspective of biosecurity, of Kodi dieback, of anything you can imagine. And we were just exhausted, really. And we felt a wee bit fraudulent, didn't we, Amanda, being in this space, answering on behalf of all Māori. And so Amanda came up with this brilliant idea to test what Māori communities might think about a Māori biosecurity network, although we weren't calling it that at the time. And we went to MB with a Vision Mātauranga application, or a Connect application, and we're really lucky that we were successful in obtaining that. So it gave us a wee bit of money to start the journey and to start asking questions with our communities. And in 2015-16, Amanda mostly hit the road with Waitangi and with Tiffany Wilson. And I joined them when I could, and they went around the country and visited many marae and spoke to many of our whānau, asking a couple of questions. One was a Māori biosecurity network needed? If so, what would it look like? And what would it do? And we used an exemplar to kind of explain why we thought a network might be needed. And the exemplar we used, thanks to Albie Marsh, who had been working in this space for some time, was myrtle rust. And we said, this is an incursion that could hit our communities. And if it hits, these are the impacts. This is what it will do to our taonga species. And this is what could potentially happen in the wider system, through policy, through actions under the Biosecurity Act. And these are the things we need to start thinking about. With that in mind, whānau, do you think we need a network to start preempting some of this? And largely the answer was yes, we do. And yeah, we want to know about that incursion in particular. In about 2017, in April 2017, our community at a hui in Auckland said, yes, we want to establish, and we want to call it Te Tira Whakamātaki. So we kind of say that we began in April 2017 with consensus that we should exist, and this is our name. We were given 3 kaupapa to focus on. One was ensuring that Māori had a voice in the biosecurity system. 2 was to protect that voice. And the 3rd one was to come up with Māori-based solutions for biosecurity incursions. In May, so less than a month later, 2017, myrtle rust hit our shores. And of course, our communities were prepared because they'd just had 2 years of consultation on myrtle rust. And so they went, hey, we know a network that can help us. And they reached out predominantly through Albie and Waitangi as well. And Ngāti Rihia in particular reached out in the first instance with the first incursion hitting them. And they said, hey, Te Tira Whakamātaki, can you come help us? And that's where we began, was as a hapu-based organisation that was there to support Māori to have conversations about biosecurity. And I'll hand over to Amanda, but we were really, really clear of a couple of things. One, we were not there to be contractors and consultants. We were clearly on the side of Māori, on hapu whānau side, and we were there to help support them to have the biosecurity conversations that they needed to have. We didn't want to be an intermediary in between them. We weren't there to take government contracts and government money and to set up a consultation, consultancy business. We were there to support, again, whānau to have a voice in the biosecurity system, because we saw some issues with the system itself, which I'm sure Nick will talk about when he comes on board. And because we know how powerful the system is and how much money is in the system, that we wanted to kind of challenge it. And we were also really, really clear that we needed to be an advocate for the environment. And we believed, and I know that others now use this line, so it's one of our legacies, we believed that everything in the conservation estate and in the primary sector was underpinned by biosecurity. So we were kind of one of the first ones, I think, talking about biodiversity being underpinned by biosecurity and how important biosecurity was to the Māori economy. You can't grow your conservation estate and you can't grow your primary sector and your investments that we get as settled iwi if you don't have really strong biosecurity practices. So this kind of led us to where we were in about 2017. And I'll close and hand to you, Amanda, by saying that in August 2017, because of the huge upward journey we had in the myrtle rust space, we were mandated by the iwi chairs as their biosecurity technicians as well. So we still hold that and still offer information through the National Iwi Chairs Forum via our representative, which is Hami Pirapi. So Amanda.
Thank you. Talk about a trip down memory lane. Actually, some of the landscape behind that is really, there were 3 pivotal points or movements that came towards us. I reconnected with Nick Waipara, go way back with his whānau through our parents' teaching. So there's a connection there. Went to school with his younger brother. So we reconnected in the science space. Mel and I were both in the Bioprotection and Research Centre, very, very stale, well, I shouldn't say that, but very, very siloed, very Pākehā, Western centric approach to science and biocontrol and pest management. At the same time, the biological heritage was in its infancy, so it hadn't been signed off yet. And there was that research platform there that was basically a National Party platform about a mission driven. And their mission, it ended up being, you know, reducing the decline of our biological heritage, and that included in not only conservation, but they incorporated biosecurity there. And so we were involved in all these movements. Nick was still very heavily involved in the Kauri Dieback Tangata Whenua Rōpū and Management Program, and was jointly held by Department of Conservation and the Ministry for Primary Industries. And Nick had spent 10 years at Auckland Council as Principal Biosecurity Advisor. So Nick was in you know, up to his eyeballs deep in every sort of post-border biosecurity issue there were. So, and I guess when we entered the space, it was kind of like we didn't know what we didn't know. And we didn't realize that there was lots of little wheels within wheels in this kind of murky world of biosecurity and the people that keep biosecurity and research. And so, yeah, you know, in mātauranga itself, vision mātauranga policy was growing in legs and was starting to get some substance behind it. And you know, when this is part of when you apply for research, then people need to consult with Māori or include that in some way or some form. And so this is the approach that we were getting as research scientists. And it seems like, also another thing that was coming was the Biosecurity Direction 2025 from the Ministry of Primary Industries, which Nick and I were on this working group, a Māori focused working group. So there were all these sort of balls in the air. And I guess the three of us, there's a couple more involved, so I shouldn't just say us, but anyway, it was all these sort of, we pulled together these threads basically, and that was the establishment of the Māori Biosecurity Network. We called it that time. We played with other few words, but at the time, that's what we saw it, and it was centered around the management of pre and post-border biosecurity threats. We were borrowing quite initially on the Kauri Dieback program model, engagement process, and we expanded to include other Māori organisations, iwi rōpū, with similar interests in protecting the ngāhere from biosecurity incursions, pests, pathogens, and weeds. So the whole, you know, or the whole ensemble of everything we didn't want in this country, we were focused on. And it was kind of, and as I said, it was timely because it was the launch of all these other platforms and strategy documents that were floating around. And now, I mean, we did go around the country. We did ask some basic questions. You know, we thought it was needed, but maybe we were wrong, and maybe there was something out there that could have done the job as well. But we found out that it was needed. And I guess that when you start asking questions, people realize they didn't know these things, and then you start peeling away the layers, and you realize how complicated and disconnected things are. And so, you know, part of, I think what we ultimately tried to do is piece these things together and make it more palatable for people to at least understand the system and where the gaps are and where the resources are, and help with some of that horizon scanning, but also bring mātauranga back into the, well, it was never in the fold, but help exposure there and introduce both sides to a sort of a co-model where it can work together. So we were focusing very much at the governance level with the Government Industry Association as well, which is again a very closed door. You know, you had to pay to get in there, but as well as the grassroots movement, because we all know that conservation has no money and therefore depends on the goodwill of communities such as Māori. And I think, and it's kind of grown from there. And some of the examples we were using at the time was murderous. It wasn't here, it soon came here. I don't know if you could say it was fortuitous, but it helps cement our position, solidify our position, I guess, in the biosecurity space, and highlight the need for it as well. And we also talk about rapid eye hair death, and the way that I guess things were managed in New Zealand, and it still kind of is it's prioritised very much from an economic point of view, whereas Māori, Te Ao Māori world, they don't quite have the same values. And so we were trying to bring that in as our values I guess that kind of value looking in there as well is something. And also going back to a marae hapu based sort of a response to a lot of these incursions as well, instead of that very top down position that we get that usually get a lot of pushback with. And so I guess that's what we were advocating for. And Mel very much took that role and went out into the communities with Albi and Waitangi Wood as well. And they really did a lot of the groundwork in there. I think I'll probably let Nick in on this because I think that's from my memory anyway.
Great, Amanda. Yeah, so welcome, Nick. Great to have you on board. So if you'd like to introduce yourself and give us an overview as well, in addition to TTW and its origins, please.
Well, kia ora tātou. The first thing I'd like to say is biosecurity needs, I put it to get his computer working first. But anyway, no, aroha mai for that. But anyway, te uri ahau e te tairāwhiti, te hapu te maunga, te ara te awa, koro pane te ariki, koro kata te iwi, kōna waipara te koino. So, thank you. And I was really glad when I did connect. I was hearing magical thoughts and mahi that has been happening for many years, and thank goodness people like yourselves are there to remember it, because I hadn't. It's all been a blur. But I just want to also acknowledge it's never about, it's always about our tipuna have always done biosecurity, and it's always been here, but it's the protection of our taonga, but it was just we weren't in the system. And if we were in the system, i.e. the biosecurity system, it was a very hard place because it was very lonely often. And I remember, what I do remember, it was a very lonely place for a lot of people in a system that was emerging itself. And yeah, I guess those reflections are really awesome to acknowledge. I remember the first Māori I ever heard say biosecurity in an academic way was Mary Roberts. So you always have to kia ora to those who have helped guide and lead from many years onwards. So I think that's the role. And the question I think is what do Māori want in biosecurity? And often, as you said, people would come and ask you that question. And my response was, well, go and ask. And I think that has led to the what's been happening now. And you, Amanda, kia ora, and Mel, the whole point of getting it funded was to start that kōrero, start that engagement, start to talk to Māori, start to talk to mana whenua about what biosecurity means to them. Don't try and do it on your own. So that sounds obvious, but in the 1980s it wasn't. To many. So yeah, it's a very long road for a lot of people, and you always have to recognise that we've always been managing so-called pests, even the whakaaro of what is a pest. I mean, even that has to be challenged. So it's really integral to what we are and who we are and where we are as to what that means to someone. And most of all us in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So to me, that is what's happening, but we could do it quicker, longer, harder, faster, because biosecurity, I've always told my students, if you're in biosecurity, you have a job for life. So anyway, no, that's some of my earlier thoughts on it, but it's gone into many spaces. It's gone into conservation. It's gone into health and water. I mean, biosecurity is across all our government agencies, and it always has an influence in there. But yeah, it's really interesting to hear what people are saying, what biosecurity means to them when you ask. So basic, isn't it?
I think when you do tell people that it's a job for life, you're telling them it's a job that doesn't pay well. The conservation system, definite, and biosecurity system, we don't get into it for the money, we get into it because we love this space. Secondly, the meaning. So when I go around the country meeting with different iwi, hapu and whānau and marae around biosecurity. I sort of say, to me, the meaning of biosecurity is a biological organism that has a negative impact on what a community values or considers of value. And there's a lot to unpack in that, that definition. The main one for me, though, is what a community considers of value. And because it's different to everyone, Māori communities have different values to non-Māori communities. Industry will have different values to environmental communities, so on and so forth. So it's always a good place to start a wānanga, I think anyway. And you're right around going and asking communities. I see a lot of people in here from different agencies and entities and industries. And another question TTW gets asked a lot of is, how do we engage with Māori? And you're right, sometimes it is easy just to say, go ask. A lot of people find it hard, they're scared. Some even think they don't need to. And others, probably more the dangerous ones, think they have done it. They have gone and asked, and they're going off on the wrong foot. And that's where we see a lot of communities push back. And I've certainly seen that in my time in the biosecurity system, and I'm at the one end of the spectrum in sort of long-term management. So once a pest is established, that's generally when Māori get involved. We don't get to be, previously we didn't get to be involved in those other parts. Anyway, we could probably go on and on around the bad stuff and the past. Changes are coming. So what I'd like to do now is ask our guests, what does the future hold for TTW and the biosecurity system, whether it's in play now or what you'd like to see? So Amanda, we might come to you first.
Well, I guess, you know, I am still addicted to academia. Obviously, I'm still here. So I'm really speaking from very much a research and training perspective here. The future of biosecurity is, you know, it's broadening all the time, and it is becoming more inclusive and certainly more diverse, and from where I sit anyway, in terms of how we train things. And, you know, TTW, I guess, was the start of having these conversations with a more diverse group of people, rather than, you know, people going to talk to person that does insect versus person that does, you know, fungus that shouldn't be here, and all those sort of things. And so it very much, for me anyway, from my perspective, connected communities to research more. And I think as Māori, we were able to do that a little bit more because, you know, when we're here, most of us come from small communities. Well, I certainly do, with a strong Māori focus. And so it's a natural lean for you to go there. And I think biosecurity, well, in terms of what I do, is certainly moving towards building those connections, making them stronger, and identifying those that should be there and need to be strengthened. From the research perspective, I mean, we're trying to so I run a Centre of Research Excellence here, and biosecurity isn't a particular focus. It's we do much wider perspective on everything to do with protecting landscapes. But, you know, we're trying to encourage the students that we bring through here to be very much values-based. So we have Te Ao Māori values that oversee all of our research and how we behave together. And 15% of us are only Māori. So, you know, all the non-Māori are buying into this as well. And it's a generational thing. It will happen, but they're starting to appreciate, I guess, and understand where it all fits in. When there's a lot to go and we're growing, but it's certainly a change I see for the better. It's certainly a more connected way of doing science. And certainly the people we train will be more appreciative of different ways of seeing things and different perspectives.
Question then, Amanda. What would you tell someone, a young student who wants to study to go into the biosecurity system? What's some advice you'd give them?
Well, first of all, I'd ask them what they think it is. You know, because biosecurity means different things to different people. And, you know, why biosecurity if they answer something that seems to be within the ballpark of what it should be? And I was like, well, what aspects do you want? Do you want to, you know, are you interested in insects and curious about, you know, the relationship between insects and a plant? Or are you interested in the microbes and the way they interact with everything? Or are you just interested in plants? You know, what aspect are you interested in, and what part say biosecurity? Do you like the research aspect? Do you like just going out there and making a very visual impact on the ground? Are you very much a field-based person? So that can kind of, I guess, determine the areas that they want to go in. And I just try and massage them in the direction that I think that they want to go and might be best fit for the type of person they are.
Nice. Very, very nice answer. Mel, we'll go to you. So opportunities, where to for TTW next and where to for the biosecurity system?
Yeah, I guess I'll kind of, like I always do, and everyone who knows me knows this, that I'll go backwards before I go forwards. So we were really lucky that in 2018, we were able to establish Te Tira Whakamātaki as an entity in its own right. So for those of you who are curious, which won't be very many, Te Tira Whakamātaki is a charitable foundation, and that charitable foundation owns a charitable company, and the charitable company focuses on research. Both of those entities are set up in a Pākehā system, and Matua Kevin, you challenged us to be a Māori organisation within the constraints of a Pākehā structure. So we've tried to do that by establishing a kāhui as well that provides oversight over both entities, whether they think they do or they don't. They actually do, and everything they tell us we take to heart and try and implement. So for both of those entities, they have slightly different goals. For me, the foundation is Te Tira Whakamātaki Foundation is very much an education organisation. So like Amanda says, our focus in 2022 is going to be primarily on training. The training that we have in mind, as you'll know, Tami, because Tami, as many of you all know, is actually the man who does a lot of our stuff and will do next year as well. We have some focuses. We want to stand up again our seed conservation training. We're hoping COVID allows us back out into the communities to run more seed conservation training like we did in 2017 when we had our friends from the Millennium Seed Bank and the Australian Seed Bank partnership come to Aotearoa, New Zealand, and train 35 of our kaitiaki on how to do seed conservation from a traditional seed conservation sense, not a mātauranga perspective. But that's a huge priority for us next year, is to roll out that training again, even if it's in a mixed model, some online, some in person. The other one that I'm really passionate about as well, and great to see some of these amazing governors online today, is to think about governance training for the biosecurity sector. Every time there's an incursion, and I'm sure our Biosecurity New Zealand whānau online will tell us, there's a governance group established for that incursion, or often there is. And at the moment, there are probably about 4 Māori who sit on those governance groups. And we're getting really tired and really exhausted. And we don't want to be on every single incursion. I know very little about wallabies. I shouldn't really be sitting on that governance group. It should be Tami. So we hope that next year we can roll out some very specific governance training in the biosecurity space so that we can have a pool of people available to be on incursion governance groups. And of course, there are some other areas that we want to look at training as well that we will roll out. And Tami did a fantastic job last year doing some security training for our kaitiaki who are in the bush, facing some of the nastiness around, pest management that they might face, or just being Māori in the bush, for example. So that's a key priority for the foundation. The company is a research entity in its own right, and it means that in 2022, we want to make it really obvious, and we want to take some steps into that space as an independent research organisation. So we will be looking at establishing potentially a Māori research association with many of our colleagues who are also independent Māori research organisations. And we're having discussions at the moment with like-minded organisations about how we support each other, especially as we go into the review of the research science innovation system with the government. There's also opportunity for us and a keen interest with our colleague who's back from Canada, Simon Lambert, to think about what research support we can establish in Te Tira Whakamātaki for our whānau. So we're having conversations right now about establishing a Māori ethics committee and a Māori research council or committee that's actually available to our hapu and whānau out in the wider, rohe who are working in the space. And again, that comes from our kāhui. So we were challenged by Matua Jim Doherty on our kāhui, and I'm sure Matua Kevin will jump in and tell me if I'm wrong. But Matua Jim Doherty challenged us at one of our last meetings, and he said, Bub, I think I've been hoodwinked by one of these CRIs. They told me that the research project was about X and it turned out to be about Y. And, he was really brassed off. And so we process those kinds of comments from our kahui, and we thought that one of the opportunities we had as an entity was to provide some, a council of some sort of our Māori academics like us and our friends to provide a bit of rigor and support for communities who might want to challenge or question some of the proposals that were coming to them, and or who were doing their own research and just wanted to bounce ideas around ethics off of someone else. So those are the things that I think we'll be focusing on the very near future. Long term, most people who know me will know that the goal for us and for me is a seed bank owned by us. So a Māori owned seed bank. And I'm really excited, as Amanda and Nick and you are telling me, that we've started that journey. We've got some plans in place and we're working through that at the moment. So ultimately, 10 years time, I want to see a Māori seed bank with a research centre and an education centre built probably in the Republic of the South Island, in the Republic of Te Waiponamu, for the safety of our taonga. And that's kind of the short and the long-term goal.
Thank you, Mel. You did mention something there before, for a governance training program. Similar question to you then. If we had a young person come talk to you and say, hey, I want to get into biosecurity governance, what is one kaupapa that you'd tell him to go look into that would help us?
No run. What's one kaupapa I tell them? Again, like Amanda, I'd kind of do the whole, what do you think you're going to get out of it? So I would be really clear that governance has a particular role. Governance doesn't get you to delve down into the deep, but it gets you to think about those big issues and those system things. So I guess one of the things that I would probably suggest is thinking about understanding the Act, and understanding some of the policy levers and the legislation that surround the biosecurity system, not the Biosecurity Act. I would get them to think about what all of those things, like Matua Kevin said to us, mean from a Māori view, as opposed to as well as what they mean from the Crown's perspective. And I guess what I'd say to them is the best way to learn, I think, in governance is to learn on the trot. And to get yourself a mentor and a coach. And I guess my challenge then would be to those from Biosecurity New Zealand who are on listening, or from our GIO partners, and that is to open your doors and allow us, people like myself and Nick and Amanda and you, Tami, who sit on these groups, to bring a rangatahi with us and have them sit alongside us, because the best way they're going to learn is sitting next to us.
And I do think you touch on a good point there, that sometimes everyone's got a different view of what the biosecurity system is. From our own lens, whether it's a Māori lens or a non-Māori lens, and it can be different. Nick, over to you. What does the future hold for TTW and the biosecurity or the biosecurity system?
Huge potential. As I said, it's a job for life in biosecurity, because I think everyone reflects with COVID amongst us. That's biosecurity. And the Biosecurity Act is, when I was being accredited to hold a biosecurity warrant, it really is a really powerful act that, the surveillance, all these areas is a very legislated one. So there's heaps of work or mahi, depending what your interests are. It can be in the bush. It can be, a lot of people say to me, oh, so did you start at border control looking for drugs and apple course? I said, no. And that's the point of understanding what the biosecurity system is. A lot of people's mahi is offshore. The risk assessment, scanning the globe and seeing what's happening elsewhere. There's so international surveillance. There's some fantastic positions and roles within the ministries themselves, but also I always think there's a huge potential in local government, because people don't realise that post-border biosecurity has its own legislation under the Biosecurity Act with regional pest management plans. And so for those of you in local government, there's that whole area of work and mahi with local government, which is often supposed to be more reflective of each region. So what is a priority for our wonderful whānau in Taitokoro is not going to be necessarily the same priority for resources, for attention that you're going to have elsewhere. So that's the point of the regional pest management plans. And I've always said the iwi management plans that we have, or hapu, also can declare pests in that way. So that's that whole, it can be local, it can be regional, it can be national, and it can be international. And I so working on along the lines of our whanaunga in the Pacific or Australia around international biosecurity. What are as I mentioned before, what are the pest issues in the Pacific that we can exchange our knowledges with each other about different experiences of managing pests? And that's, our whanaunga in Hawaii were the first to, experience myrtle rust, for example. So learning what others know, there's that whole whakawhanaungatanga around other parts. So to me, go big, because it can really, there's places and spaces for Māori across the biosecurity system. And I think knowing which part of the system is important to you, or if you're looking for a role or a job, like what are those areas? And you don't have to leave home. You can stay in your marae, you can stand and do that mahi there. So that's, I think it's I think it's huge. So kia ora.
You mentioned about reaching out to our whanaunga across the oceans. Based on that, what's the top handful of pests whānau should be wary of right now that have potential to get here, that aren't already here?
Well, there's a big priority around the brown marmorated stink bug, and that's because the mahi of MPI has already turned away ships that have had freight with the stink bug, on board, as well as the amazing mahi at the border with our border control people at the ports are intercepting these types of pests every day. And if you subscribe, for example, to the Port News newsletter of the Auckland ports, just about every creature known on the globe has been a stowaway on board out on those ships. Snakes, reptiles, bats, birds, nests, eggs, ants, kilos and kilos of soil. Someone told me one day, why are you trying to think about soil coming into the country? That doesn't happen anymore. And I was able to show them, I said, well, look at the top of this container that's just come in this week. There was literally 2 or 3 kilos of soil on the top of the container. That's how soil-borne pests arrive from offshore into Aotearoa. So brown marmorated stink bug, rapid or hair death or rod and that's another, basically there's just so many insects, invertebrates, plant diseases, that viruses, for example, could be here. So, a lot of people say, why, doesn't it just make you wary? Yes. Don't you think it's hopeless and you should just give in? And we're hearing that for Karo at the moment, aren't we? Open the borders and just let COVID in. Well, actually, no, that's what biosecurity is for. We don't have a lot of things still, and it's worth fighting for. So that to me is a really important for Karo to remember. We don't have every potential pest in the wood, and that's why we need everyone engaged in, supporting of that system. So, that's my and if you go to the MPI website, there's what's the top hit list for forestry, for agriculture, for horticulture, for conservation. But it would be great to have, each part of the motu, what are the pests Māori want the system to stop coming into Aotearoa as well. So that's the beauty of the biosecurity system. You can plug local priorities into it.
I see we've got plenty of whānau from regional councils and MPI on here. So Nick's good at doing this, is giving more people work. So if we could have a iwi specific list across the country of their top 5 pests, I think it would go a long way in being enabling a proactive relationship. Speaking of the system, as we said, the system is massive and it is super hard to navigate it. I've been in the biosecurity system for coming up 13, 14 years now, and I'm still lost. But we do have some people joining us on one of these webinars who, and I don't want to say their names because I haven't quite ask them, but Mel's going to tell them, that will help us dive into the biosecurity system and its different levers and opportunities. One thing that has been mentioned a bit tonight has been the Biosecurity Act. And as some people may know, that is under review at the moment. And as our whānau know, that it is one of the most powerful acts in our country, and it enables a lot of stuff, a lot of basically anything and everything that people want as a biosecurity officer, they can basically do. And while it was pivotal at its time in '93, it's definitely come the time to look at it and review it as it's fit for purpose. Please, whānau, keep those questions coming in. I'm seeing some really good ones, some tricky ones. But I'll quickly jump onto one thing. Mel, you did a good wero to MPI about allowing Māori to bring rangatahi with them. Amanda, seeing as we have a lot of research entities on board, what would your wero be to them?
To really embrace inclusion. Like, don't just, you know, use a bit of real Māori in your reports and your introductions and stuff. Actually embrace it. You know, open the doors, give some resources, give some space, and let it happen. You can't, you know, continually use the language, use the culture, and appropriate it, but not let them in and run their own programs. Yeah, because that's not going to work. It's a you know, we've got to adhere to the treaty, so it is about a partnership and is about giving Māori, whether it's, you know, they want to do Western science or they want to do mātauranga-based, that's completely up to the individual how they want to run it, but you should let Māori into the system and make a space for it, make effort.
Cool. So don't come out and write an opinion piece that mātauranga isn't science. No, we're not going to go there.
The gift that keeps on giving, that letter, isn't it?
I'm sure everyone's aware of it, but there was a letter previously this year that came out and said mātauranga isn't a science. And as I said, we won't go into it. It was worth less than the paper was written on. But Nick, we might come back to you and the value of mātauranga in biosecurity. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, we don't have to really look far as to what that contribution of when that mātauranga has been gifted by those holders for use to improve the biosecurity system, the absolutely astounding, remarkable improvement of the area that mātauranga has been allowed and assisted and led a better biosecurity response. And for example, I'll go to Cody dieback. It was very rare, I would say, conventional ecologists or forest ecologists got to say a lot around their work until Māori led a lot of the priorities around Cody dieback management in Aotearoa. And words like forest health or ecology were unusual, let's say, in the Biosecurity Act, because it's all about the pest. You're targeting the pest. That's it. It was very reductionist. No, we're not interested in ecology, or no, we're not, you know, we are, but that is the priority. And what Te Māori and the whole holistic approach to looking at Papatūānuku, you don't just look at the bug or the beast or the monster or the ngara that you're tackling, you're looking at how it is in the environment. And that shifting that, I guess, that perspective from people working in biosecurity, you've got now priorities related to mātauranga around the Cody ecosystem. And before, at least in my memory, most biosecurity responses or managements were very much focused on the pest, whereas the Cody dieback management response has a real fertile and, I think, informative guide to how you do that. And it's improving all the time, and that will improve the biosecurity surveillance for kauri dieback. And we're seeing that now in myrtle rust response. We're not just interested in that fungus with the importance of mātauranga. It's improving the surveillance system because our people know where those myrtle taonga are. And inherently, what the maramataka or what the knowledge is around those ecologies that will guide surveillance or detection or long-term management. And these are the, I guess, biosecurity and conservation language, but mātauranga is woven in areas which has improved what we're doing. And I just think there's so much more opportunity if, and it's always if that knowledge is treated with respect and mana and is maintained as Māori. I don't like that word integrating. It sort of sounds like a robot of all sorts of things. I know people don't mean it like that, but it feels unnatural. Mātauranga is, and knowledge is, and working with different knowledges, even as individuals, you will solve the puzzle. And I mean, that's no surprise to us. That's how we work. So, I mean, that recognition by researchers, by agencies is really, I think, improving the system and improving management of these awful pests in Aotearoa. So, I mean, those are just two examples, but also remember biosecurity is in our oceans, in the moana and waiawa, freshwater biosecurity. So it's about our water, it's about everything. So I know I sometimes always go on about our ngahere, but you'd forget there was fresh water if you're talking to me, but we know, the didymos and, there's all these other things. So, but, we need that guidance in a lot of biosecurity programs if it's appropriate and respected that mātauranga is included.
We did have a webinar on mātauranga, but I think it could be a whole nother webinar as well in itself. So speaking of which, if anyone has any ideas, suggestions on other webinar kaupapa, please send them through. We've got some in the waiting or some in the in lists, but ideally we'd like to address some of your guys' concerns and issues. So especially on who you'd like to talk to. Mel, I might come back to you with the last question. And this came through, is iwi face some barriers and issues getting involved in the biosecurity system? What is the biggest issue or barrier for them, and how can they overcome it?
Oh, just a little question, Tommy.
In 2 minutes.
In 2 minutes to answer it. Yeah, that's. I don't know if that's going to happen. What is the biggest barrier to the biosecurity system? Well, right now the biggest barrier would be right now would be the Act, because of the way the Act is framed. And how, unlike the EPA, it doesn't provide automatic rights for Māori to be involved in the processes right from the outset. So that needs to change. But within that, the way policy levers are designed to preference some groups over Māori is a huge barrier. So the preference of industry, because they pay biosecurity levies over Māori who may pay as Māori industry, participants, but don't pay as a collective in our own right, means that we're excluded. And the example I've quite often given is when the I can't even remember the disease, the potato mock top virus hit, I think, in Canterbury, and Potatoes New Zealand, the industry group, reached out to Te Tira Whakamātaki because they wanted to talk to Ngaitahu in particular about this new incursion in their rohi. And so they brought us to the table as the representatives, as the technicians for the Iwi Chairs Forum, and they were actively blocked by the system that said, don't bring those Māori to the table. And it's really uncomfortable to talk about that, but that's what happened. An industry group tried to bring Māori to the table and they were blocked by the rest of the system. The other example is when we've tried to join GIA discussions and we've been blocked as well. We've been told that at the most we could expect to be an observer if we're lucky to get in the room. So those are probably the biggest barriers to us participating. And of course, Amanda touched on the other, which is resourcing. We do this for 5+ years for love. We do it at nights, we do it in the weekends. We give up time from work to do this. This has only in the last year and a half paid the salaries of some people. And that is, again, by other people giving up work and giving up putia to keep the organisation running. So the biggest barrier we have as an entity is ongoing resourcing. But as Māori, we're kind of used to that. So yeah, so those are probably the two for me right now, Tami, is the act and the systems and the resourcing to be participants.
And the act, I could be wrong, but might be going to consultation, but we just have to wait and see. As everyone can tell, I'm extremely privileged to be surrounded by super brainy people, but I'm kind of used to it because my wife is the brainy one, and there's always one in a relationship, and I have to ask yourself, which one are you? It's bad news, you're probably not the brainy one. Hoia no, that is us for this evening. As I said, this has been on Facebook Live and it has been recorded, so the link will be shared on our newsletter and on our social media pages. But please, please, please send through any suggestions for future webinars. We've got a few in the few kaupapa we want to dive into, but we'd love to hear your guys' whakaaro. And I'm sorry I couldn't get to everyone's questions. Believe it or not, I've got more questions lining up here, so that might actually inform some of our kaupapa. If you do want to have a chat, feel free to chat. Flick us a message at ttw.nz. Engari, tēnei ka mihi kia koutou. Aku manuhiri, tira aku rangatira, I tai mai nei. Ko tira kia koutou, ngā manuhiri no tawhiti no tata, ko hono mai ki te rongo hui nei kōrero, nei rā ka mihi, tēnei tātou ko tukuna ngā whakaaro ki te pai tata, tēnei tātou ko tukuna ngā whanga ki te pai tawhiti, tūturu whakamaua kia tīna, tīna, haumia huie, kai ki. Enjoy your night, everyone, and stay tuned for the next webinar.
Kia ora, Tami, that was.
Mai ni ora whānau.